Morning, everybody. My name's Chris Gosse. I'm the president of the local Longshoremen Union, and I'm a volunteer with Iron and Earth East. And I'm an advocate for just transition and green energy. So that's why I'm here today, to give a bit of a presentation on shipping emissions and where we're going with that. This is where we came from. We had no emissions back then, but we never had any efficiencies, obviously. So it used to take, I think, 6 weeks to get over from Britain and Ireland. So hopefully we can get back to that, but with today's efficiencies. Here's where we are right now. Soot, lots of soot coming out the exhaust stacks. There's an offshore supply boat at our oil field supply base there. Cold engines is a lot of unburnt carbon going out into the atmosphere. IMO 2020, that's the next level of regulations. The big thing with that is the upgrade on fuel from 3.5% sulfur to 0.5% sulfur. IMO, it's a branch off of the UN, which is the regulatory agency for it. Here's the, we're hoping by 2050 to get to a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions to the 2008 levels. It's in 10-year increments. There's quite a few shipping companies that are on board, but it's been a bit of a slow process, I think, for the most part. This is the amount of ships that are sailing in the world right now, roughly. General cargo, 17,000. Oil tankers, 10,400. Bulk cargo, 11,500. We're a feeder port here, so we don't see a lot of the big ships that are sailing on the main pathways on the seas, but it's big industry. 90% of global trade happens on our oceans. Many ships have consequential impacts on surroundings. Sulfur oxides is greenhouse gas produced from ships' combustion of bunker fuel. 7% of the world's oil consumption is done by ships, 3.5 million barrels per day. There's some stuff on sulfur emissions, which is the big thing for IMO 2020, the next regulation. And at the bottom there, you can see the effects that it causes. IMO 2020, one of the most dramatic fuel regulation changes ever implemented. Low sulfur product will be in higher demand and we'll see fuel price increases. They say the impact to consumer wallets will be about $240 billion. So there's changing currents in the shipping sector because the cost of not doing it will probably be quite more extensive to the $240 billion that it's going to cost to change everything over. Switching to sulfur, low sulfur fuel. The shipping, a lot of the bigger shipping companies, there's some complaints about cost. Slower travel is one of the things that they're talking about. It's you'll use less fuel if you're traveling slower with a cargo vessel, but there's really no net benefit because you're still burning fuel, right? So we got to get to net zero. That's the idea behind the IMO 2050 regulation, is 50% reduction, and to get to net zero. There's after treatment with scrubbers, which is still not really an improvement because you still got emissions coming out. But it's taken out the particulate matter, which is an environmental concern. Number of vessels with scrubbers by segment. So I think the scrubbers will help them with the 2020 regulation, but beyond that, it's not going to really help too much. Green Marine. Green Marine is a program. That's a voluntary certification program. There's quite a few. It's North American based, but most of the bigger shipping companies are signed on to this. It's a voluntary certification, but they want to exceed regulatory compliance, and they use it as a benchmarking tool to measure performance. And it's involves all the stakeholders. And this is the 12 performance indicators that they use. And out of the 12, there's 3 of them that deal with emissions. As you can see, greenhouse gas emissions, pollution, air emissions from sulfur dioxide and particulate matter, and nitric oxides. It's just a different chart with the same things there. So there's 133 participants in US and Canada, 34 ship owners, 46 ports, 53 terminals. Each environmental issue performance is evaluated from level 1 to 5. And as you can see, since 2008, they've been doing it. There's been a continuous improvement. That's the companies and ship owners that are involved with the program. Marine Atlantic and OceanX and the St. John's Port Authority are involved with it here. So we're hoping to get more ports and ships on that. Ballard Power Systems is producing some stuff with fuel cells is their big thing. But the four mega trends is decarbonization, air quality, renewable energy, and electrification. And we're using renewable energy now on the ships to reduce carbon consumption. Fuel cell technology is needed to achieve complete decarbonation of transportation. They're increasing fuel cell activity in the marine sector. Ferries are using it quite a bit now. There's ferries that are 100% electric. France commits to sail ro-ros, 80 to 90% reduction in CO2 emissions by 2021.
Sorry, what's a ro-ro?
Roll on, roll off. It's for the decks on the boat that use transport vehicles. So the proposed auto manufacturers Renault. So we're going back to sailing for renewable energies to offset the use of the hydrocarbons, right? And the GHG emissions. And that's what the vessel's going to look like.
A combination of engine and sailor?
Yeah. But they say 80 to 90% reduction in emissions with this vessel. Wärtsilä, which is a European engine manufacturer and a Japanese manufacturer for vessels, they've got a joint venture. And they got a vessel that's coming out that can meet IMO 2030 environmental targets. And it uses renewable energy on the vessel as well. And they're looking at a 40% reduction in CO2 levels in 2008 levels, which is the 2030 regulation. And it uses solar panels, and that's what it looks like. MV Yara Birkeland proposed all-electric autonomous container ship. And what that'll be hauling actually is fertilizer. In Norway, it'll be a Norwegian vessel, 100% electric. I guess the other thing is autonomous operation 2020. That's what it looks like. So there'll be no crew on board. It can moor its own vessels, is what they're saying. So there'll really be no guys on the docks working on this one, I don't think. But I'm not so sure about this problem Boeing's having with their airlines. I'm not so sure about the software. I hope it's better than Boeing's, but I believe in a just transition, right? So I think people have to have jobs too, but I know it's not a political debate today, but. And there's our main employer in the harbor here is OceanX, and that's their newest vessel, OceanX Canagra. And I can tell you the emissions coming out of that is a lot less than the boats that they had from the late 70s. That's what we want, is a green, blue environment. And hopefully we can get there. And that's the sources for my presentation. Thanks.
All right, if you guys could have a seat up there, please. Let me just bring this up. So as I'm loading the Q&A slides, I just wanted to acknowledge an elephant in the room, which is that I think this is the only manel at Decarbonize NL, meaning that we're all guys and we tried to strive for diversity as much as possible. We sent out a lot of invitations and some people had to drop out at the last minute, so that's how we ended up with this. So I acknowledge that and apologize for it, but we'll try to do better next time. Okay, let's get set up for our Q&A. I'll give 2 minutes just for you to think about your questions and peer review them with your neighbor there and think about some stuff to talk about, and then we'll open it up. anyone directs a question to me, I'll take it from up there, and I'll also run the microphone to the audience. Yeah, there you go. Those are great. Amazing stats there.
What do you think of government here mandating that dealers sell electric vehicles? Is it a good idea or a bad idea?
That's a great idea.
Cost them money to get like our technicians from grant with the service stuff. I think that was a government, if they're gonna mandate it, they're gonna have to also like charge that, okay, we're gonna provide $100,000 to help keep the train. Like I've heard about dealerships like 1-2 day training courses, that's all they need. I was thinking about having oxygen dealers, is there any pushback from dealers? Why is the Nissan dealer just brought the lead?
Okay, I think we can get started here. So I'm going to have to simultaneously answer questions if you ask them of me specifically, and also run the mic. So I'll do my best here. So who would like to have the first question? Sorry, in the back. Just before you.
Hi, my name is Patrick. I'm a reporter with Radio Canada, it's a French CBC service. My question is related to the idea you brought up of electric cars and sort of the electricity they take, and also the carbon emissions that they remove, marrying itself well with this sort of crunch that we have in Newfoundland and Labrador related to Muskrat Falls. And you mentioned that letter you wrote to the PUB. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and also the response or any response that you received from government or from any of the powers that be related to this issue? Sure.
Yeah, so we wrote to the PUB and pointed this out because they're looking at for ideas and mitigating the cost. And what ours are driven more along the ideas of cost, the economy side. The environmental side is a total bonus, but so that really wasn't a big factor when we talked to the government. So we submitted it to the PUB, and I can get you a copy of that PUB report. It's only a short one, but basically was that if we took the Norway model or the Iceland model. Now you take Norway's got about 97-98% renewable energy. So does Iceland, and Iceland started only 5 years ago, and they've got 25 or 30% electric vehicles now of new sales. Norway started 10 years ago, but when they started 10 years ago, they didn't have much availability of product. So this year, over 50% of cars in Norway are electric sales. Our grid now, when you look at Muskrat coming on, Labrador and the island, will be 97-98% renewable energy, mainly hydro. There's some wind in the mix. Anyway, so the answer to your real question is, it went to the PUB. There is a interim report which was sent from the PUB, I think, to the government with a bunch of different ideas, and that made in that report. So then the government have acknowledged it, and part of that acknowledgement, I think, was the fact that they actually put money in this past budget, a couple $1 million, to start the process of the high-speed chargers. But it really is a chicken and egg process, in the sense I've had lots of people say to me, "Well, I'd buy electric, but I go across the island, once a month or even twice a year, and so I need that." So you put that in, and then now people have that safety blanket, even though the vast majority of charging is done at night at home.
want to add something, Chris?
No, I don't actually. I'm sorry.
Your hand was up. So.
Hi, my name is Toby Rowe. I work in the Sustainability Office at MUN. Hi. So we've been looking for funding for charging stations at the university. And what I'm finding is that it's always sort of a really big project. Like you need to get more than 20 chargers, or it has to be part of this whole system across the province. It seems like we've been having difficulty just trying to get some funding for a couple of chargers on campus. And I'm wondering if anyone knows of any ideas out there for us to go with. The most recent one that we thought we would be able to apply for, again, said it has to be part of a larger system. I think it was 20 or over or something. And we're talking maybe 4 or 5 if we look at the different campuses. And I'm wondering also how much effort we should put into that, because as you mentioned, most people who are driving their car from home have charged up the night before. And if they're driving to MUN, how important is it for us to have chargers on campus if they're not the fast chargers?
I'm in a position to answer that one, being at MUN and all. So I'll take a first crack at this one, because we actually have chargers at MUN, at the Fisheries Marine Institute. And that is there because of a combination of 4 years of me pestering them, and also because we have a champion up there, which is Greg Moss, who we invited to be on this panel. He's the facilities guy at MI. And not only did he convince them to procure charging stations, he also convinced them to procure a Chevy Bolt. And the reason why was the economic case for it, because they do a lot of, there's a vehicle pool. Every university has sort of a vehicle pool. And by having chargers at work, it enabled them to get a electric vehicle as part of their vehicle fleet. And he ran the numbers on it. And he said, this makes total sense. Brought that to executive, and they just funded it. Because they said, yeah, we need to cycle in. We've got these Ford Focuses. They're always falling apart. So let's have like something that isn't going to fall apart all the time, that is going to save a lot of money going back to Holyrood and all these different places. And those vehicles, as the charging network comes in, are not going to be just for around the city. You're going to be able to do those cross-island trips with them if you need to. So that was done a different way. There was no grants or anything involved. It was literally just like, let's make this part of our regular procurement because it makes financial sense. And that would be the argument for having chargers at MUN, because you need them if you're going to have fleet vehicles. So it's not just for sort of average, like regular people to use them. It's also to enable the fleet stuff. There is a new federal government program, which I'm not sure, maybe you, Joe, know the parameters of it. Okay, we'll pass that over to you.
Just quickly on that, there's a federal program for public area chargers, and like you say, the minimum was 20 to go in. My partner in crime, John Siri, he's actually he actually has a company, and he's looking at it right now, trying to collectively put together 20 as a group, so it can be, you know, two from MUN or whatever for MUN for somewhere else. And that's going to happen this summer. So I think the deadline on that would be September 15th, maybe this year. So I don't know how the turnaround time, but I'll give you my contact information.
The other thing I would add is that level 2 charging stations are about $1,000. They're 800, 12, depending which type you get. You can get ones that are a little bit fancier. But if we're putting in 20, we're talking about an investment of $20,000 plus installation. So throw another 1,000 or 1,500 on each one. So we'll call it 40. And so that means you're asking the federal government for $20,000, and you're asking out of the capital budget for $20,000. So one of the problems, I think, when people think about the level 3 chargers, because that's what we're always advocating for, is those are about $100,000 each. So that's a much more significant investment to put a fast charger in. But those slower chargers that are suitable for if you're going to be parked somewhere for a few hours are very, very inexpensive. And that's why at MI, they were able to just do it as part of their capital procurement.
Yeah, right. The level 2 charge, I went home the other night, I had 10% charge left in my battery, and I went to 80% in 2 hours. Yeah. So I went home, went out again. That's level 2.
Okay, so your hand was up first, and then I saw you as well.
Thanks. Hi, Piers Evans with the town of Portrait Cove, St. Phillips. I've got a question for each of you, actually. First, regarding the electric vehicles, you guys talked a little bit about kind of some sort of heavier or larger vehicles. I'm just curious about if you've seen anything coming down the pipe on sort of municipal fleet vehicles, plows, heavy equipment, those sorts of vehicles becoming electrified, and you know, how they compare on cost, maintenance, those sorts of things.
really can't speak any authority at all. I believe there's been some earlier movements on that, but maybe in Europe, so it could be a ways away here yet. So I really can't give you much information at this point on that.
Okay. And the other question I had just about the shipping, I'm wondering how those more electrified and autonomous ships compare to traditional internal combustion ships on maintenance, whether they have the same sort of, savings on maintenance as electric vehicles do.
As far as I know, the that new ship, that autonomous one that they're talking about coming out with, that's 2022, I believe. That's coming out. There'll be quite a bit of savings in maintenance from what they're saying. But there's upfront costs, obviously, about building the ship, but the life cycle of the ship, there's supposed to be quite a cost in saving. And just an answer to your first question, I know Volvo and some of the other truck manufacturers are looking at making electric trucks as well. And it's in research and development stages, but they're looking at it.
Hi, my name is Jess. I work for the Newfoundland and Labrador Fish Harvesting Safety Association, so I'm in occupational health and safety. And you piqued my interest with the electric boat. I was wondering if there's any opportunities in this inshore small-scale fishery to transition this way. Not to mention, with OH&S, a huge problem on vessels is noise and hearing loss. So I feel like, I'm wondering if there would be less noise pollution and damage and all that kind of stuff with these kind of motors.
Well done formulating that as a question at the end there. I can just quickly answer one piece about the fisheries piece. So there is a test platform in Sweden where they actually made a hybrid fishing boat, and it's exactly what you're talking about, where it was a relatively small battery for boat. It was a 200 kilowatt hour battery, and it was basically sort of like your plug-in hybrid. So they'd be able to fish for a few hours on the battery and be completely silent, no pollution during that time. And then they would have, if they ran out of battery power, they'd have the regular conventional diesel motor that would turn on. So this does exist. But it's obviously a very niche item, so we'll see whether that's going.
I guess, Brett, I want to answer a question with a question. The boat in Sweden, how much range does it have?
They talked about in terms of hours rather than range, because it's not like a car so much, obviously, with a boat, because like if it's wavy, there's a lot of things that would change the range. They were just describing it as like 4 or 5 hours of operation is how they were calling it.
Yeah, and fishing is kind of like a duty cycle type work too, right? Because you're hauling nets and you're doing stuff. It's not like a constant load.
Yeah.
So that creates a challenge as well. And I think the big concern here in Newfoundland would be for our fishermen. They're going out to the Flemish Cap and the Virgin Rocks, or some of our smaller fish, about 55-footers, 60-footers. They're going out to the Hibernia platform now, right? So that's quite a range out there, I think. So from a health and safety perspective, it's a good question, obviously. But I haven't heard of anything really fishing-wise here yet. But they're doing it with ferries because they know where they're going and they're coming back, right? So from an occupational health and safety perspective, we'd have to get it down pat before I think they would try that, right?
And I'm just going to show some, because I didn't really linger on this too much, but this is that ferry that I was showing earlier. See that arm there? So every time the ferry pulls in so that cars can drive off, that plugs in. And so there's a regular sort of 20 minute to 30 minutes where they're interfacing with the dock, right? And so that comes in, charges up, then that robot arm comes out, the ferry leaves, and then at the other side, it plugs in again. So it's constantly discharging and recharging. And remember how I said earlier, like keeping the battery between 20 to 80% is ideal for it? Never gets below 20, never gets above 80. So this battery is going to last a really, really long time because of that. The Chevy Volt does that automatically, so you don't have to be thinking about it. When it says 100, it actually means 80%. And as a result, the first Chevy Volts made with like the earliest technology that was in these cars have no degradation at all. There was an article about this. The one that has the most mileage on the road is like 750,000 kilometers, and they couldn't detect any degradation. They had to replace like some other part of the car, but the batteries were fine. And that was 2011 vehicles would have been built in 2010. It's now 2019. It drove 750,000 kilometers. The battery's fine. So, okay, next question. The truck.
I got a question, Brett.
Sure.
For you and Joe, just with the electric vehicles, the level 1 charging station, is that as efficient as the adapter to charge at home?
So that's what-
Will it charge the batteries fast or?
No, so level 1 means this, right? Level 1 means your 110, sorry, yes, behind you, is that one right there. So it's like your regular wall outlet. They call that a trickle charge because it does charge, but it goes really slow. And it's not ideal because you lose more to resistance with that as well. So you are better off doing it at 240 volts at least. But, you know, it's an option, especially if you drive like a Leaf or something and you park in your garage or your driveway every night. From this picture earlier, my wife and I, we don't have a driveway or a garage. So we're parked out on the street. So I don't want to get on a whole tirade, but we had to work with the city to get permission to do what we're doing here because this is the sidewalk in front of our house. And so we got a permit basically where we have to put these special cable covers that I spray painted bright green. And that's what we have to put out when we're charging the car. So we only have it out there while it's charging. We don't just leave it out all the time, right? Any other questions? Okay, there was a bit of a tie there. So we'll start here.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Heidi Janes. I work for Shorefest on Fogo Island. I'm wondering, you said that Marine Atlantic was under the Green Marine program right now. Do they have any plans to electrify the ferries that service rural areas? There are quite a few in the province. I know they're all new fleet recently, but is that in plans? Do you know? Can you speak to that maybe?
I don't deal with Marine Atlantic too much, but as far as I know, they're looking at it in the future, but I don't think it's in their media plans, which is unfortunate, but I think they'll be looking at it in the future for sure.
Could pass this all the way down to this.
Hi, I'm Kate. I'm with the Conservation Corps. I guess my question is, like, we can all see the benefits of having an electric vehicle, but how do we encourage people to, like, buy electric? Because it's still 1%, even though, like, everyone can see the benefits.
Well, when I speak to people, I appeal to them both ways because I'm not sure where they're coming from sometimes. So some people will buy them for the environmental benefits. That's fine. But a lot of people naturally have pocketbook issues. Everybody has a budget to live on. So what I say to them, if you're buying a new vehicle, for example, yes, it is a little more expensive as we saw, but instead of costing you $3,000 in gas a year, it's costing you $300 or $400 for the same mileage. And the other thing too is there's 20 moving parts inside that engine, as opposed to the other one, there's 2,000. So the maintenance costs, there's no oil changes. So you're saving money on your maintenance per year. You drive around the city, you got to do brake pads regularly. Well, these have regenerative braking, so you slow down first by just lifting off, and then it actually turns the generators and starts to recharge the battery. If you need to stop faster, well, use the brake pads, which means your brake pads last 4 or 5 times as long. So that alone, people do a brake job now, it could be 500, 1,000 or more sometimes. So I appeal to the pocketbook and I appeal to their environmental. But I look at I said, what you got to do is don't look at what it costs up front. What does it cost you over the next 5, 6 years or 7 years or whatever, how long you're going to own that vehicle? And the economics make really good sense, which appeals to me and the environment, of course.
So we have a question from Twitter. So this will be our last question. It's from Hannah, and then there's a whale icon in her name. So at Homaris Hannah. Her question, I guess, is I'll direct it to Chris. So it's about the autonomous ship. And her question was sort of along the line of the earlier questions about noise from that ship. So is there, are you familiar with anything to do with the noise? And I want to extend that question a bit because there's a big elephant in the room, which is the labor component. And so now there's this weird thing that sort of happens where electrification often goes hand in hand with automation for a bunch of reasons. And so what's your view on that? Because this is really important because people might be opposing this for clear interested reasons for labor. So how do we sort of in your mind get around this? How do we achieve electrification if automation has to come with that? What do we do about the labor? So the two questions were, is it quiet? And what do you think about that? And the labor.
From what I've read in the reports on the development of the vessel, it is quiet.
Yeah.
And it meets the acoustic. Will meet the acoustic standards for IMO 2050. Obviously, as a president of a union and a trade unionist, I think we have to save jobs. There's some societal impacts and everybody losing their job with autonomous vehicles and autonomous shipping and autonomous dock work. I know our members here in St. John's, they provide an economic benefit to their families and the local economy as well. And if people aren't working, who's paying the taxes in the country to support these programs and public health care and public education and all that other stuff that people need? So I think there's some societal questions that have to be answered around electrification as well. Because like you say, the autonomous agenda and the electrification agenda, sometimes they seem to go hand in hand, right?
Yeah, and I don't want us to lose that thought, because if they do go hand in hand, then that will be in opposition to electrification and potentially a legitimate one.
And a just transition is, I mean, oil field workers, they have to develop into renewable energy workers, whereas a just transition if they don't have jobs. And it's the same thing for people that work on the boats, seafarers, and people that work on the docks, longshoremen, they need jobs.
And when people say there's savings, that's the savings, right? Oftentimes it's because you're not paying as many people.
And it's the biggest threat. It's the biggest threat to dock work right now. The International Transport Workers Federation and the International Dock Workers Council, all the transport unions have big campaigns going against autonomous vehicles. And even if you look at UPS with these autonomous vehicles, I think there's 13,000 members in the Teamsters Union that drive vehicles for UPS. But if they go to all autonomous vehicles, they won't have jobs. So.
And every single one of these semi-trucks are going to be autonomous capable too. So the trucking industry as well is largely going to have a major labor transition. So, and
they've already tested an autonomous vehicle from the Mexico border to the Canadian border by itself, and it's passed. It's done it.
So on that note, did you have anything to add there, Joe?
No, I just wonder if if electric and autonomous are simply happening at the same time, in the sense that even if it was a gas vehicle, the next generation would be autonomous anyway. It's an interesting.
Yeah, it's a fair point, but so I don't understand. It might just be that they're sort of parallel technologies. But the one thing with electric stuff is that robots can charge them up. So whereas with gas, to my knowledge, nobody's really got a robot arm that connects it. With electric vehicles, there is, and I just showed you one with that ferry where there's nobody that's driving that, right? The thing comes in and plugs in. There's a video that was shared about electric cars a few years ago now, where it was the snake arm thing that found its way into plugging up the Teslas. And so one could imagine a future where there's all these autonomous cars driving around, and you don't own a car, you own a subscription to a car, and the car, when it runs out of power, just goes to one of the stations, plugs itself in, and then comes back onto the network and is driving around the city. So this is like a weird thing that's happening. And so I think as we go to the Citizens Assembly, it's worth it as we're brainstorming to consider that these two things do go hand in hand, that we do need to electrify transportation, but that there will be legitimate barriers when people start losing their jobs because automation has happened at the same time. So
good point.
Yeah. Okay, so let's transition. So thank you very much. What should we do to decarbonize this sector? Pick a few of the most interesting ideas. How could they be achieved? And for those ideas, what might be their consequences if enacted? Because this is a small room, we'll wheel one of those banners up here. So maybe we can have like a group here and a group here, and then maybe a group in the back. And I think that should be about right. We can maybe get a fourth one going too out in the hall or something if we need to. Everybody understand what we're doing? All right, let's get started.